Welcome, Dr. Epic here, and this is General Anthropology. And in this first lecture, we're going to meet a strange little creature. We're going to talk about the neocortex that's inside your brain. We're going to discuss subjective realities. We're going to meet Victorian scholars as well as the man who proved them all wrong, a fellow named Franz Boaz. We're going to follow that outline right up above my little yellow box. So put that outline in your notes to serve as a framework for the lecture that's about to follow, as we both ask and answer the question, what is anthropology? Okay, so what is anthropology? Anthropology is, see, you know it's important because it's in all caps. Anthropology is the study of the human species in its both physical, mental, and material aspects. Anthropology is the social science that studies humanity and the human species. As such, anthropology has 4 distinct subfields, and each of these subfields covers a different facet of the human species. There are 4 of these things: physical anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, and cultural anthropology. And we go over each of these in much more detail later on. And all of these things describe the totality of humanity. All right, so humans. What is a human? And I'm about to show you something that's very disturbing, because that's a human. I know it's shocking, they're disgusting, they're weird, they're brilliant, they're horrifying. Look at it sort of scuttling around, almost like it knows what it's doing. Oh, they're even more hideous close up. That is a human. Now, if you encounter a human in the wild, please be very careful. They are highly intelligent, highly unpredictable animals, and they can be quite dangerous. Don't get your hands or fingers anywhere near their face or within biting distance. You never quite know what these things are up to. So there is a human if you've never encountered one before. They look like that. Now, what do we know about these humans? Well, their scientific name is Homo Sapiens. It's of the genus Homo, and they are the only modern version of this genus. There's a lot of these things. There's 7.8 billion of them, sort of all crawling around the surface of the planet. On average, they're about 165 centimeters tall, so the average height is 5'5", so not that tall. On average, they tend to weigh about 80 kilograms, that's 176 pounds. They become fully sexually mature by age 18. Generally, they live to be about 67 years for the males of the species and 71.1 years for the females of the species. Thus, inarguably proving which, is the more intelligent biological sex. Generally, they tend to be an olive brown coloration, although there is very significant variation, both individually, geographically, and historically. Just look at it. That's a human. Now, current scientific evidence suggests that Homo sapiens originated around 1.8 million or 150,000 years ago, depending on exactly what your definition of human is. And we know this from the fossil record that has been discovered across the continent of Africa. Subsequently, humans spread out from Africa and covered all 7 continents of the planet Earth, and have even occasionally visited their nearest satellite, this big ball of dirt called the moon. During their long occupation of the planet, these humans have built an enormous variety of societies. Some of these societies are very, very complex. Others are much smaller scale, including village farmers, mobile hunter-gatherers, through their ingenious use of sharp rocks to get them the resources they need. The vast majority of these human societies are long gone. They've long vanished, leaving only traces of their existence scattered across the surface of the planet. Now, sometimes the traces of this existence are quite impressive. Some of these extinct human societies have left impressive material record of their passing, yet less than 1% of humanity's past was ever written down. And almost all of these ancient societies, 99% of the human occupation of the planet, can only be accessed through archaeology and the archaeological record. These humans, they like to travel in groups. Humans are social creatures. But humans don't inhabit herds. They're not pack animals. Instead, humans inhabit these complex social constructs, which we will call social networks, the size of which seems limited by the complexity of part of their brain called the neocortex. The neocortex is the outermost and densest layer of your brain. Now, it seems that humans only have a set number of social relations in any given individual, and this seems to be related to the amount of memory in their neocortex. And the human social network is internally hierarchical and generally numbers between about 100 and 150 individuals. And this number is known as Dunbar's number. And it seems to be the maximum number of individuals that any given human can actually know and remember at any given time. And again, this is limited by the size and complexity of the individual neocortex. The brains of the humans can only remember about 150 people. Some individuals can remember more, other individuals can remember less. But Dunbar's number was come up by a researcher named, Robin Dunbar. And there's Robin Dunbar right up there. And through studying higher primates and extending these studies into the human species, Robin Dunbar calculated this number. And basically the way that Dunbar's number works is we have a small circle of very close friends and family. And this numbers, about 5 to 15 individuals. And then outside of that, we have a larger circle of about 50 individuals. These are kind of just friends. We know them, we know of them, but we really don't know them particularly well. And then outside of this number, you have a larger number of about 60 or 70 individuals, which are just kind of acquaintances. You know them, but you just really don't know that much about them. And we only have so many friend slots in our neocortex. And we've experienced this all the time. We make a new friend, but for every new friend or new acquaintance we meet, it seems that we cut someone else loose. And Dunbar's number seems highly consistent. If you look at human society, from human society to human society to human society, Dunbar's number is repeated over and over and over and over again. The size of a Native American village among the Yanomamo people in Amazonia is about 40 to 70 individuals, half the size of Dunbar's number. Friends and family plus friends. The size of a Neolithic farming village, demonstrated archaeologically, about 120 individuals, almost the size of the minimum portion of Dunbar's number. The size of a U.S. infantry platoon. The Army did a lot of studies to find the ideal group of individuals that can work together, and they came to about 40 and 50 individuals. In other words, close friends plus friends. Average number of people on Facebook that you interact with on a regular basis, about 120. Again, Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number is basically the size of the human social construct at any given time. The social crowd that these humans move within is about 120, 150 individuals. That's the size of the human social network. Now, these human groups are generally held together by a shared set of social practices and traditions. A human's social network influences almost everything about them. Their patterns of consumption, their politics, their religion, their dress, their religion, I put religion twice. Their everyday patterns, habits, and mores. If your social network dresses very conservatively and very formally, you will dress very conservatively and very formally. If your social network is Baptist, then you are more likely to be Baptist. If your social network has one set of politics, you are more likely to share that group of politics. And even if it's unconscious, you will feel pressured to conform to the mores and habits of your social network. This set of shared social practices that binds together these human social networks is called culture, human culture. It is learned unconsciously from the people you grew up around and from the people you associate with. And you know this all the time. In fact, you've probably experienced it. An individual human, perhaps yourself, will hang out with a group of people, and after about 6 months to a year, you start to dress like them, you start to act like them. Sometimes you start to speak like them. You are slowly absorbing the culture of the people around you. But culture does more than just kind of determine what clothes you like and what food you like and what church you go to or whatever holy place you go to. Culture does more than all of that. It also helps shape and create a subjective reality, helping humans understand and relate to an objective universe that they can only partially perceive and cannot fully understand. And this brings me to one of the core concepts that I'm going to hit over and over and over again in this course. People, humans, do not react to the world as it really is. Humans react to the world as they perceive it to be. Humans do not respond to their surroundings as they objectively actually exist. Humans respond to the world as they imperfectly perceive it. So you have this illusion that's been painted onto this road, and it's not real. Somebody's painted this huge canyon running down the middle of this road. The canyon doesn't really exist. It's an optical illusion. But if the people on that road, if the people living on that road believe that the canyon exists, they're going to change their behavior based on their perception. If they want to go from one side of the street to the other and they think there's a huge canyon in the way, they're going to walk all the way down to the end of the block, walk around it, and then walk back up to get to where they want to. And in fact, if you went to them and said, this canyon doesn't really exist, they will argue with you, all right? Because you're impacting their perceptions. You are changing the subjective reality. You're challenging the subjective reality of their social network. Humans live inside a subjective reality. And a subjective reality is the worldview or the cosmology of any given population. And it may or may not have any relationship with objective reality. Ooh, spooky. If a human group believes in an accessible, vibrant spirit realms where you can do these ceremonies and talk to the ancestors and talk to your dead grandfather and talk to the spirit of the mountain or the spirit of the river, they're going to act as if all of those things are objectively real. If a group believes in the intervention of powerful supernatural spirits, they're going to act as if those powerful supernatural spirits exist. They're going to take those supernatural spirits into account when they judge their actions. If a group believes that Zeus the Thunderer sits on top of Mount Olympus, they're going to take his commands as a central guiding force in their lives and daily actions. Because humans don't inhabit the world as it actually exists. They respond to the world as they subjectively perceive it to be. In terms of their decisions, the objective reality of the world, the objective reality of these beliefs is secondary at best. If you believe you've been reincarnated on the cycle of karma 1,000 times, this is going to affect your daily life. Additionally, these humans, oh, look at that group. Hideous creatures, the lot of them. Humans communicate with each other through a mix of body gestures and spoken sounds, the latter of which make up the majority of their communications. Human vocal cords, these things, specifically have been evolved for language, and humans can make roughly about 157 distinct sounds when they sort of fashion the mechanics of communication, when they exert and blow air through these meat flaps in their lips and throat. That's how these strange animals make these sounds. And each sound possesses its own place on something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is something that all of you will love to grow and admire. Without language, humans have a great deal of difficulty communicating. And here's the importance of language. There is no human population that lacks language. They all blow air through their meat flaps and communicate in this way. Although it should be pointed out that some groups are much more loquacious than others, and some human groups are very, very reticent. Again, it depends on all the different cultural groups. All human utterances can be mapped on something called the International Phonetic Alphabet, or the IPA. The IPA is an alphabet designed to reflect these 157 sounds that the human body can make. And it can accurately transcribe any sound coming out of the human mouth. And the IPA is really interesting, and it produces these incredibly bizarre sentences. And I really like the IPA, even though it's really hard to use. You have to really know what you're doing to use the IPA. And in fact, I've transcribed a sentence in IPA right up above my little yellow box. And I'm now going to read you this sentence, and I want you to follow the phonetic utterance as I do so. Because written right up above my little yellow box is the sentence, "Hello and welcome to anthropology class." Hello and welcome to anthropology class. In fact, I read a science fiction novel once where in the future they've discarded all other alphabets and they use nothing but the IPA everywhere. Probably wouldn't work that way, but it's really interesting. The IPA is in fact so sensitive that different accents are actually written in different ways. Because there are a lot of human languages. There are currently 6,912 human languages currently being spoken in the 21st century, although approximately 500 of these languages are on the very verge of extinction, and probably a large number of these languages will go extinct within the next 50 years or so. The smallest language ever recorded is a language called Taki-Taki, which is spoken in parts of Suriname. And there's Taki-Taki right there on the left. The entirety of the language of Taki-Taki has only 340 words in it. They just changed the grammar. They have a lot of grammar rules. The largest language ever invented by humans is modern English. And modern English possesses more than 1 million words. And the most common spoken language among these humans is either Mandarin Chinese or modern English. It kind of depends on how you measure it. If you measure it by primary speakers, people who learn the languages as a first language, Mandarin Chinese is the most common language on the planet. But if you include people who have picked up a second language, then it's easily English. But of course, there are a lot of people in China that also speak English, so we're like double counting some of these people. But English is the largest and most one of the largest, has the largest vocabulary of any language on earth. And this is largely because English has very, very simple grammar rules. But this is one of the reasons why you have things like that right up above me. That's the Oxford English Dictionary, the compact version. It has a definition of every single word in English, and it's absolutely gigantic. In fact, there's nobody actually really knows like all million words of English. It's absolutely ridiculous. But language is really interesting because the relationship between language, language structure, and human thought is heavily debated among linguists. Equally heavily debated is the degree to which literacy changes the structure of human thinking, as well as the type of literacy. Because you see, even in a language like, English, when it became a mostly literate language, when most of the English speakers could also read and write English, it changed the language. It became much more stable, and it required people to buy that gigantic dictionary because they had to be able to use words correctly. For instance, there are many cultures that in fact have a cyclical idea of time. Now, in modern America, the humans there have a linear concept of time. They think that time goes from A to B to C to D. But not all cultures share this. And some cultures think that time moves in a circle, that it goes from A to B to C and then back to A. And this tends to be reflected in their language. Additionally, you have written languages. That's written Maya right up above my head. And written Maya also has a kind of cyclical aspect to it. Because to the ancient Maya, they wrote down their history because they believed that the study of history was also prophecy. Because the past will reoccur in the future, and the future is just a repetition of the past. So you have this cyclical mindset, this cyclical idea of time, which enters the Maya historical record. So, in attempting to deal with the significant degree of variation present in all of these different humans, this is the realm of anthropology, with all of its overlaps, contradictions, and redundancies. Anthropology can be at times highly scientific, all right? It can be ultra-rational. It can be clinically detached detached from the object of study. You look there in the upper left, she is accurately, highly scientifically studying these skeletal features of that cranium on her book. On the other hand, anthropology can be humanistic, it can be free-flowing, it can be warm and touchy and feeling. It can be a conversation on a deck in the mountains, discussing poetry, discussing prophecy, discussing the future and the past and a concept of reality itself. Anthropology can be both poetic and scientific. It can be ultra-rational and as nurturing and understanding as any discipline like poetry or literature. In fact, it can be, at times, pure literature. Anthropology, on the whole, does not have a very glamorous origin. This is sort of the origin story of anthropology. Anthropology began essentially as the science of colonialism. It began as the study of non-Western peoples that were incorporated into the expanding European empires of the 19th century. Now, in the United States, this included the Native Americans that were forcibly incorporated within the United States as the Western frontier overwhelmed them. And anthropology was that drawing on the left. It was a study of how to better settle and how to better manage and how to better conquer non-Western peoples. Anthropology served as a study of the primitive people in the empire and their strange customs and beliefs. Victorian anthropologists, these people in the 19th century, they saw no great contradiction between culture and biology, and many early scholars hewed to a very racialist idea of behavior, thinking that both social and cultural behaviors are in fact heritable. If your dad was a thief, then you are likely to be a thief. If your dad was a great warrior, you are likely to be a great warrior because you're going to inherit those cultural behaviors. Of course, it doesn't work that way, but that's what they thought in the 19th century. That's what that guy thought. That's Edward Taylor. These Victorian anthropologists would then use accounts of explorers and colonial officials and military officers to build their arguments for the development of the human race. These armchair anthropologists often had these very heated debates about the evolution of human culture. But of course, they could never solve any of these debates because they didn't actually go anywhere. The armchair anthropologists sat in their salons and in their studies and drank their tea and ate their cucumber sandwiches and pontificated about their understanding of the world. But you can't really prove anything unless you go out and actually encounter the world. They didn't want to do that. They were comfortable. You had a comfy chair, you had brandy. Hard to get a cucumber sandwich in sub-Saharan Africa. The Victorian argument basically was this. It held that all aspects of culture progress together. Both technological, cultural, biological, and moral aspects of a people advance through a set series of stages in human sociocultural development, human sociocultural evolution. You should find hunter-gatherer bands with simple technology, small-scale societies, primitive tools, and sort of adolescent morals. They're like little children, the people of the desert, okay? And then those people advance to kind of the more advanced Iron Age civilizations, where you find empires with iron, philosophy, understanding of the world. But even that stage was then replaced with the apex of human cultural development, the Victorian country gentleman in the industrial age with machines and locomotives and railroads and steel foundries and big bridges and everything. It was very 19th century. The Victorians argued that all human societies go through the set number of stages in a kind of ladder of cultural and social progress. The result of this was to view both the human past and the human present as kind of a ladder of progress, a ladder of development. At the very bottom of the ladder are these very simple societies. Hunter-gatherers, early farmers. They have small-scale societies, small groups of humans, simple technology, simple morals, and simple minds. About halfway up the ladder, you have the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, larger scale societies, more advanced technology, and more advanced minds, and a more advanced sense of morality. And of course, at the very top of the ladder, you have Victorian Europe, industrial age technologies, railroads and steamships and all that stuff. But it's not just that they had more complex societies, not that they had more advanced technology. They were more morally advanced and they were more intellectually advanced. They were just better people, both morally and intellectually. Now, when it came to studying non-Western peoples, this meant that these Victorian evolutionists were pretty much not concerned about studying individual cultures. Everything they did consisted of comparative analysis. So they wouldn't look at a people in Africa and study everything about this one culture in Africa. Rather, what they would do is look at, say, how all these societies across the planet did agriculture, how all these societies across the planet did, for instance, their moral character, how all of these different societies looked at swords, for instance. And this idea of human culture fitting into this huge ladder of progress fit very well with Victorian values of social and technological progress over time. And indeed, it fit right in with their political agenda, as they saw it as the duty of their empires to uplift these backwards people and liberate them from their simple, savage, and backwards cultures. Because the idea was that these technologically simple societies represented survivals from more primitive eras of human existence. When they study the Aborigines of Australia, these poor people have been trapped in a Stone Age technology for 30,000 years. Their culture somehow stagnated from the days of primitive man. So when we study Australian Aborigines, according to these Victorians, you are essentially studying ancient humans because these people quit developing, according to the Victorians. The Aborigines, from a Victorian perspective, were simple primitives, survivals from a simpler and more savage era of human development. Now, more often than not, this idea led to a crude pseudoscientific racism, either in the form of social Darwinism or progressive eugenics. Victorian anthropology lends itself to heavily discriminatory views in which these backwards people must be liberated from their backwards culture. And if we can't save them from their own culture, then there's nothing to do than just clear them out of the way and push them off their land to make way for the more advanced and cultured Europeans. Science lends itself to a mismeasure of man in the 19th century. Attempts to prove racist theories through anthropology, supporting the inherent superiority of white Europeans over the primitive folk that they forcibly conquered in the 18th and 19th centuries. And this mismeasure of man, this perversion of science to support the racism of the day is excellently documented in Stephen Jay Gould's book, The Mismeasure of Man. And you can see that really awful diagram there on the left, where you have the advanced Apollonian Europeans, at the bottom, the savage ape-like orangutan, and in the middle, the Africans, halfway between orangutans and Europeans. It's ugly stuff, ugly stuff. Now, I want to emphasize that none of this actually works. They were actually scientists, and science did win out in the end, because the entire schematic of this kind of idea of evolutionary progress completely falls apart in the 20th century. So don't take any of this evolutionary sequence that I described as anything like a major step in understanding the human past. Anytime you build a schemata where you place yourself at the apex of human development, that should be a red flag right there. The Victorian gentleman is not the apex of human development. The theory of sort of continual technological, cultural, moral, and intellectual progress doesn't really work. That's not how human cultures develop. In fact, all human societies have experienced the exact same amount of cultural evolution. They've just gone in different directions. In Australia, they learned to walk the dream time. They learned to accurately map and intrinsically understand the land itself, so that they don't need advanced technology. And they lived for tens of thousands of years without any of the problems or the savage violence of Europe. It was Europe that decided to go in a completely radical direction, embracing technology, embracing power, embracing conquest. Both societies do not represent different places on a ladder of progress, but really different options that have been collectively decided through time Different societies have made different collective choices. And it is quite debatable whether any of them are better than anyone else. In fact, I would say they're not. And at any rate, the horrors of the First World War largely unseated any thought in the inevitable progress or the innately superior European culture. When Europeans killed each other by the millions, far more savagely than any of the sort of backwards people that they were trying to uplift. I mean, Europeans killed 20 million people in 4 years. That is not an intellectually or morally superior people. But even before the start of World War I, there was an intellectual movement against this 19th century evolutionary thought. And the fellow who would win this debate against the Victorians was Franz Boaz. And there is Franz Boaz right there, a quirky little Austrian who comes to America and creates Americanist anthropology. And you know he's important because his name is in all caps. That's like a dead giveaway right there. Now, Franz Boaz was not an armchair anthropologist. Franz Boaz wanted to see what actually these people were actually talking about. So he went and lived among them. He didn't sit in his salon, sipping tea and eating his cucumber sandwiches. And through discussion with and by living among native peoples, Franz Boaz came to the realization that these non-Western peoples, they're not primitive, they're not backwards, they may not have the technology of Europe, but they certainly are every bit as moral within their own systems. They're certainly every bit as intellectually developed as anyone in Europe. And that through the application of scientific techniques, the heritable nature of behaviors can be dismissed. You do not inherit the behaviors of your ancestors. And there is Franz Boaz himself wearing an anorak as he studied among the Inuit peoples of northeastern Canada. Boaz, who is known as the father of Americanist anthropology, argued strongly against the use of anthropology to serve the imperial political designs of the Western powers. He argued for the use of the scientific method in the study of the human species and for active field research on the part of the anthropologists. You can't do anthropology and sit in your armchair at home. You have to go out and talk to people. You have to live with people. And if that means freezing on Baffin Island for years on end, then it means freezing in Baffin Island for years on end. Because that's exactly what Franz Boaz did. And he thought this is what anthropologists should do. And this is why he more or less created anthropology as we understand it. And there he is, old man Franz Boaz from his seat in Columbia University. So according to Franz Boaz, if you want to be an anthropologist, you have to go out into the field to study a people, their cultural practices, their physical aspects, their language, and even their distant past. Now, Boaz did not originate the 4 subfields of anthropology, but he strongly encouraged them among his students. Boaz insisted on anthropologists being trained specialists, not Victorian dilettantes dreaming up these fever dreams of evolutionary schemes from their drawing rooms and salons. And Franz Boaz also focused on Western peoples. He said what we should do is create a science of humanity where we can look at a peoples and bring back lessons from those people to improve both societies, not conquer one and try to uplift it. And to this end, what Franz Boaz did, what the great old man did, was bundle together these 4 subfields of anthropology: the study of the human physical form, the study of the human past, the study of language and language structures, and the study of human culture. And this is what Franz Boaz did. He just didn't talk a good game. He actually did it. And he wrote a number of books about, the Kwaikutl of the Northwest, about the Inuit of Canada. But probably Boaz's most influential book was a study he did not in the frozen Arctic or the Pacific Northwest. It's one he did in New York City. His most influential work was not on distant small-scale societies, but on immigrants in New York City. And this is a book that changed how we think about people. It changed the very concept of how we think about human biology. It's his 1911 book called Changes in Bodily Form of Descendants of Immigrants. It's a very sexy title. But the book is basically how the bodily form changes in descendants of immigrants. There exactly go. Now, the book actually began as a study in 1908, commissioned by the United States Immigration Commission as a study of what the effect of large numbers of poor immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe were going to have on the American nation. And again, the idea was that almost everything is inherited. And Americans in 1908 were really concerned. They saw large numbers of very short people from Southern Europe, from Italy, from Sicily, from Greece, from Poland, from Russia, from the Ukraine. All of these small people were moving to the United States, and they were concerned, we're going to have all of these like really short people moving into the United States, and it's going to make Americans as a people shorter. Is this going to stunt physically the growth of Americans? Franz Boaz did not think so. And, the impact, the effect of Franz Boaz's research is so, he argues his case so well that I'm going to explain his argument to you, and it's going to seem like common sense. And that's the mark of a really successful science, that the argument is so crystal clear that it literally becomes common knowledge. Because this is what Franz Boaz argued. Franz Boaz argued that people are not short intrinsically and genetically. The immigrants that are moving to the United States are short and stunted because they're coming from poor parts of the world. They're coming from parts of the world where they did not receive sufficient nutrition in childhood. So what they're going to do is these people are going to move from, say, Sicily or Naples or Poland or the Ukraine. They're going to move to the United States. They're going to embrace American culture. And the descendants of these immigrants will change in shape. And this is what he saw. You can actually look at that chart on the left. He's looking at 3 generations of immigrants. The original arriving people are quite small. Their children are quite taller, and their grandchildren even taller than that. Franz Boaz was able to take this argument and flip it on its head. The people were afraid that all of these short immigrants were going to make Americans shorter. But instead, what happened, what Franz Boaz was able to prove, is that immigrants aren't going to make Americans shorter. America is going to make immigrants taller. All right? They're going to move here. They're going to do well. They're going to work hard. They're going to get a good American diet. And the grandchildren of these immigrants from Naples and Poland and Ukraine are going to tower over their immigrant parents. And in fact, you see this all the time. You can look at these old family photos, and there's tiny little grandma from the old country, who's maybe 5'2", and her grandson stands 6'1". Just the success of America created larger descendants of immigrants, hence changes in bodily form of descendants of immigrants. Immigrants aren't going to make America small. America is going to make immigrants taller. And every now and again, this old argument of Franz Boaz is revisited through time. Most recently in a scientific study by Bogan and Rios, which was published in 2003. And what they did is look at Guatemalan families, half of the family which was in Guatemala and the other half of the family which had moved to the United States. And they found this exact same thing was happening. If you look at that chart on the upper left, the solid black line is the daughters of the half of the family that stayed in Guatemala, and the upper line with the clear circles is the stature of the daughters of the half of the family that moved to the United States. And they would occasionally visit their cousins in Guatemala, and the American half of the family literally was 10 to 20 centimeters taller than their Guatemalan cousins. Incredible. The research stands through time. In fact, you probably listen to this and we're like, well, of course, that's exactly what happened. But that's how good Franz Boaz's research was. Franz Boaz continued in this highly empirical mold and often embroiled him in these very vigorous and often ugly debates within popular culture, within science, within anthropology. He got his job as the first director of the Field Museum of Chicago, and then he was promptly fired from that job. And then he was ultimately censured by an organization he helped found, the American Anthropological Association. So he got in these very rough and tumble fights throughout his career. Franz Boaz did not back down from a good philosophical scrape, and he is to be commended for this. Franz Boaz proposed actual field work, and he worked himself among the Inuit and Kwaikutl peoples of North America. He sent out his semi-legendary students across the globe, a group of students that are collectively known as the Boazians. And when at one point in time they actually asked Franz Boaz, you should study the Negro problem in the United States. Why is the Negro people of the United States so decidedly socially inferior? And he did. He studied this for about a year and then came back and said, there's nothing wrong with African Americans. It's all the racist white people that are causing problems. That's not what people wanted to hear back in like 1906. And he said that the position of African Americans in the United States isn't going to improve until, this is Franz Boaz, quote unquote, there are large-scale changes in the racial attitudes of whites. He wrote this in 1906. People did not want to hear that in 1906. At any rate, the modern condition of anthropology, which is still inside this four-field approach, comes directly to us in the 21st century through the efforts of Franz Boaz. And it explains some of the more sort of scholarly quirks of anthropology, how we have this huge field, and there's all of these little subfields within it, and they overlap, and they communicate, and they argue, and they get in scrapes with each other. And that's what we're going to do in the context of this course. We're going to walk through all four subfields of anthropology. And the goal of Franz Boaz remains valid. Even more than a century later, the great old man's voice still echoes from 1906. And basically his goals are fourfold. One, the intensive study of distinct human populations. Two, the explanation of the wide human variation across the world. Three, the explanation of how this variation developed. And finally, four, the origin and evolution of the human form itself. I am going to be the loquitur of Franz Boaz when I am teaching this course, and I hope to do the great old man justice, even though I'll probably screw it up. But really, this comes down to Franz Boaz's big question. This is the question that he posed to all of social sciences, and it's really only anthropology that can even open a perspective on answers to this question. And that is the great question of Franz Boaz, right up above my head. So put it in your notes. And I want this question to kind of lurk at the back of your mind as we move through the course. This is Franz Boaz. Why are the tribes and nations of the world different? And how have the present differences developed? It's a question that he tried to partially answer during his lifetime. And it's a question that we are all continuing to add to his answer, in the 21st century. This is why anthropology has these four distinct subfields: physical anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, and cultural anthropology. And now we're actually going to dig into what those four things are, but in the next lecture. And I will see you there.